through. I think that's where we are. I think we're at text 18. So what's happened thus far, and you're good, Anandi, you just do your best. We're cool. I think what we're going to do is blast through about 20 verses, which I used to do quite a bit, but I've just been taking my time and meandering and spending as much time as I feel like spending on verses to try to flesh out the meaning. But I think that these next 20 verses, they work well as a chunk, as an autonomous chunk of information. So let's think about where we are right now. Arjuna is on the battlefield. He's going to have to kill his kinsman. He becomes totally despondent. Krishna descends from above, really foments Arjuna's agony, and gets Arjuna to a place where he's ready to finally accept some good instruction. Arjuna has this fabulous moral dilemma that warrants inclusion in a college course on ethics. Everything he values versus the rest of the world. All the people he loves. It's like everything you love versus everything you like. All the people you care about. It's like all the principles you love versus all the people you care about. It's, like the fate of the world versus the fate of your family. It's like epic proportions as far as a moral dilemma goes. And then Krishna refuses to really even engage with Arjuna's direct problem. And he instead takes a different tact. He explains that Arjuna is a spiritual being. And he does it with some panache. He says, why are you even lamenting? You shouldn't lament. And he says, people are going to die. Why wouldn't I lament? And Krishna says, nobody dies. And Arjuna says, what are you talking about? I watch people die all the time. And Krishna says, their body dies, but they don't die. There's a part of you that continues. He makes an argument for that. And Arjuna says, well, okay, fair enough. Whatever, fair play. But what am I supposed to do? I'm in this world. I'm watching people's bodies die. It seems really bad. And Krishna says, learn to tolerate. Just like you tolerate heat and cold, pleasure and pain. And Arjuna says, well, what's in it for me? And Krishna says, liberation. And then Krishna gives a beautiful Upanishadic statement about things that are really true are always true. And if something is a temporary truth that's here today and gone tomorrow, it's not worth focusing on. And he makes a further argument that if you want to look for evidence of the soul, look no further than your own consciousness. These really compelling and powerful arguments in a variety of languages, meaning they're all in Sanskrit, but he argues with Upanishadic language, a very cryptic, philosophical style of speaking. And he argues also in a very plain, almost in a martial way of speaking. The way two male warrior friends would talk with each other. And he argues the Upanishads are philosophical, but they're cryptic. And then Krishna also argues in a more straightforward philosophical way. He also offers some scientific evidence, an actual thing you can point to and measure that trips up or throws a spanner in the works of an atheistic depiction of the world. And that leads us to text 18, which is in some ways a summary of what they've covered so far. The material body of the indestructible, immeasurable, and eternal living entity is sure to come to an end. Therefore fight, O descendant of Bharat. Did you guys follow that? So he wraps it all up. Everybody's body's going to die. So why not just do your duty and not be so attached to trying to stave off death? There are things which are more important than staving off death. If death is not really the end, then principles, Sanatan Dharma, which means eternal Dharma, are higher principles that govern someone's life through the point of death. People get abused in prison. And generally what makes people agree to be abused in prison is injury, fear of injury and actual injury. Actual injury isn't enough, because if you're willing to get injured somewhat regularly, then people leave you alone because you're going to fight back and you're too much trouble, and there's always better and easier prey available. And so even if you are prey, if you're weak, if you fight back really vociferously, then people end up leaving you alone because it's just not worth the trouble. There's easier prey out there for predators. Predators look for easy kills. That's why lions don't hunt the fittest zebra. They hunt the weakest zebra. Predators look for the easiest prey possible. Do me a favor, jump up, go in the foyer. Either one of you, you. Read and turn the lights right by the bathrooms. Turn the lights on the foyer. And so, you can imagine somebody's being accosted or they're being taken advantage of in prison, and you say, hey, you got to stick up for yourself and fight. And he says, I don't want to lose an eye. I might get killed. It's a reasonable argument, right? But some people would respond to that and say, yeah, you might lose an eye, but at least you won't get abused. If you survive, at least they'll leave you alone. Like, yeah, you might lose an eye. Okay. And? You should still fight back, even if you die. Better than getting stomped on, trampled on, taken advantage of. Do you understand? It's a very, very simple, somewhat thuggish example. But it highlights that for some people, there are things that are worse than death. How about protecting your child? How about protecting an innocent child or an innocent woman or an old person, somebody who is, more apt to be taken advantage of, and you see that happening on the street? Do you leap in the breach? Do you jump in? How about when the grenade gets thrown in the midst of the soldiers, and one of them just jumps on it, and 100% dies, but the rest of his mates don't die? There's some principle that you're willing to die for, something bigger than your life, something that you give your life for. That principle to some extent transcends death, because it's worth even paying the ultimate price to stay true to that principle. Give me liberty or give me death, right? I mean, our country is practically speaking built on these types of tropes and ideas. And so, in general, when we encounter people who are willing to die behind what they value, in general, it's amongst warriors. Police officers, is that Uvalde? And then those 19 kids, terrible tragedy, they died and the cops didn't go in. In general, American firefighters and police officers all have a hero's complex. If you go, let's say, to Switzerland, their firemen don't rush into burning buildings to save people. And they end up saving just as many people as we do, but nobody dies. They're all well trained. Nobody leaps into a burning building. They figure out how to extricate people. And they take fire safety really seriously, but they're trained not to run into a burning building. American firefighters all have this hero's complex. So as soon as there's a burning building, everybody wants to run and jump into the burning building to save somebody, and then they die. sometimes unnecessarily. And there were better ways to go about it. You follow this? So you're way more likely to die as an American firefighter, but you're way less likely or only equally as likely to save somebody because they just, in the other countries, this, socialist countries, they just do a better job. We all have this martyr complex, this heroes complex in this country. However, there are exceptions to that rule. And there being a gunman in a room with a bunch of small children, that's when you should rush into the burning building. And for some reason they didn't. They waited. For some reason they didn't. Maybe throw a little tear gas in the windows, right? I mean, it's the kind of thing where I hear about this and I immediately start to think it through. Lob some tear gas, some smoke grenades. Okay, well, what if the kids choke to death? Well, it's better than them getting shot to death. I'm going to give myself a better chance at rescuing the kids from choking to death on tear gas than I am giving the kids a chance to avoid getting shot to death by a guy with an AR-15 rifle and, whatever it was. I think he had 90 rounds of ammunition when they killed him. And so he would have had a lot more than that. And they should have just charged it. Gone in low, blown the door off the building. Maybe might kill a kid. Okay. Blow the door off the building and then go in low and try to take the guy out. Well, what if there's some crossfire and you kill a kid and we get a multi-million-dollar lawsuit? Okay. Those all seem to me to be worthwhile risks to take when somebody's slaughtering children in a room and you're only so far away. Or just let the parents go. They would have gone in there and rushed the guy. Probably a few more of them would have fallen, although it's Texas. So for all we know, the parents were also armed. Who knows, right? But there are times, and that's usually where we see it. It's usually like warriors. It's usually where we see this idea that there's something they live for, dignity or the protection of others or whatever. But I think there's also a real maternal sense. There's that famous sculpture, that woman in Pompeii who's embracing her child, and it's a fossil of a woman embracing her child. So they're dead. The lava's coming. There's no time. They're done for. Mount Vesuvius erupted. The lava's pouring fast. It's not like in Hawaii where it's like going real slow and you can walk up to it, poke it with a stick, and then back up a couple feet. Like you're done. It's like coming at you like a river, and you're getting swept up. And the mom's kind of last reaction was to embrace her kid, so she was burned to death before her kid was burned to death. It shows, the maternal instinct on full display. Like what real, how intense maternal love is. So it sounds really epic and big and like the subject of a movie or something like that, but you have to think in those terms when you're discussing what would you be willing to die for. It's big stuff. And so Krishna's making an argument that for a warrior on the battlefield, there are things that are more important than the maintenance of your body. Arguably, even if you're an atheist. It's not that atheists never have any kind of moral philosophy. They might have a harder time grounding it. It might end up sounding more whimsical or arbitrary. It's tough to make a really good argument for an absolute moral theory from an atheistic position. I don't want to spend a ton of time on that, but it's not that atheists are never moral. They never have any kind of code they live by. Whether or not they can ground it philosophically and make it coherent or not is another subject, but you still find atheists with a moral code that they'll live and die by. So arguably, this idea that's a premise of a lot of these arguments that Krishna invokes, that you have a duty and there's no reason not to do your duty, including death. If you take into account that your loved ones won't actually die and they'll live on, then you're not even extinguishing them forever. You're just ending their body, which is going to end in a few minutes anyway. Imagine if we're all going to die in a few minutes anyway, and you can do the right thing, and we might die a few minutes earlier, but we're all going to die in a few minutes anyway. Like the plane is crashing anyway, and you can disarm the gunman and sacrifice your life. Why not do it? Why let them take more people with them? Why let them have that win? Why not stand up and do your duty? Go out on your shield. You're going to go out anyway. And so Krishna's argument, because the body's going to die, therefore, don't be so hung up on it that you're willing to compromise your morality. That's the complete argument. You follow? Otherwise, you end up with an antinomian philosophy. If you take this verse at face forward value, your body will come to an end, therefore nothing you do in this world matters, therefore you can commit any crime or do anything you want to do. So there's a substratum of this argument that Krishna assumes, it's already been articulated, that you don't want to commit sin, that you want to do your duty, that you want to do your dharma, and that dharma is important and it's above all other things. And so you should do your dharma above all other things. Even if you're an atheist, you should do dharma above all other things. What to speak of if you have a conception that the soul goes on. Now it becomes even more obvious that why would I want to sacrifice something eternal, my dharma, for something temporary, my body? You guys get this? You know, Saint Augustine is famous for saying the early Christians did a bunch of weird stuff. Early medieval Christians, they would wear horsehair shirts where the shirts had horsehair on the inside so it would itch your skin. They would sleep with a piece of meat hanging above their face so they would smell it all night, and they liked the smell of it, and so they wouldn't eat it. Or they would take freezing cold bath. And so they would do stuff like this to tempt themselves and then stick to their principles. Of course, they also made beer, so let's not give them too much credit. And some of the stuff sounds kind of weird, like the chalice stuff, where they have the vice grip on their leg, cutting into themselves, or self-flagellation, they're whipping themselves. It gets a bit gory and a bit much for me in terms of torturing their bodies. Gets a little fetishistic, gets a little masochistic. It gets a bit much sometimes, certain varieties of the austerities. And Krishna actually critiques such austerities that torture your body and the Lord who lives in your body. But the famous quote from Augustine, who was a 3rd century, 4th century, super important early church father, he might have even been 2nd century, Augustine of Alexandria. And so his famous statement is, there are much colder places than this, my friend. So you take a cold ice bath, and people go, why are you taking a cold bath? And he would say, there are much colder places, meaning hell is a much colder place. And so I'll perform these austerities in this world to get a great reward, so I'll see Jesus on the other side. I'll sacrifice my life in this world so my forefathers will look upon me, knowing I died a good death. The samurai were all about this, dying a good death. The Vikings were all about this, dying a good death. Everybody was looking for a just cause to sacrifice their life to. They didn't want to die old and decrepit with Alzheimer's and senile dementia, incontinent. They wanted to go out on a shield, die a noble death, a good death, so they'd be able to look upon the faces of their tribe in the afterlife and have lived this life with honor and upheld the values of their tribe and their community. So anyway, even the motherhood example is just so epic. But if you're thinking about what would you give your life to, you have to think in those terms. What's so valuable you give your life for it? And so the principle of doing your duty is an unstated premise that runs its way through all of these verses. Otherwise, the verses become somewhat antinomian. They justify almost anything. Everybody's going to die eventually. It doesn't matter. No, everybody's going to die eventually, and you're going to get your karma. And you got to do your duty. And it's going to come back around. And therefore, you should live with integrity. Do you see how it's a two-part argument? Everybody's going to die and there's nothing else. Then I should just do anything. It doesn't matter. And that position is called antinomianism. That nothing matters. You can do anything. Nihilistic. Okay. Neither he who thinks the living entity the slayer, nor he who thinks that slain is a knowledge, for the self slays not nor is slain. Well, that's a rough one. So what does that mean? That means that the murderer and the murdered, neither one's real. It's all an illusion. It doesn't matter. You shouldn't think so-and-so committed murder. And if so-and-so didn't commit murder, then so-and-so didn't commit rape or child molestation or any bad thing. And again, you're flirting with this antinomian position. So an unstated premise of these verses that's already been established in the Gita is the idea of doing your dharma. And so Krishna's saying that don't get too wrapped up in this world. There's something bigger going on. There's something more important going on than just maintaining your life. Don't fall into this delusion. The self is actually transcendental. He's also making a philosophical point. So there's two things going on. One is, don't think the whole world lives and dies with you, and your birth and death are the most important birth and death in the history of the world. You're a small part of something much bigger than yourself. Play your role, and if you get extinguished a few minutes earlier, it's not that big of a deal. It's just a radical detachment that's beneficial for most people. The goal of life isn't to hang on till the bitter end. You know, it's funny, there's the Charge of the Light Brigade, which none of you would have ever heard of. Who's heard of the Charge of the Light Brigade? None of you. But if you're from England, everybody's heard of the Charge of the Light Brigade. During the Second Crimean War, the UK was fighting the Russians, and accidentally somebody gave the order for the Light Brigade. The Light Brigade is cavalry with rifles, and they're meant for scouting missions or sometimes chasing down the enemies. They're armed with sabers too. So they chase down the enemies. The sabers, you don't fight with a saber like this. They're really heavy. You actually let it fall behind you. So you ride past your opponent on the horse, and then you hit him with a backwards slice as you're going past him. And then the heavy weight of the blade does all the cutting. And you cut behind you as you're driving past people on yours. That's why if you actually feel the weight of these cavalry sabers, they're unwieldy. You can't actually wield them like you might, like a lighter saber. Those cavalry sabers are like much, much bigger and thicker and heavier. And that's because they were wielded in a different way. But anyway, they were for skirmishes, small parties, chasing down the enemy, scouting, etc., etc. About 500 soldiers. And so the Charge of the Light Brigade is famous. It's famous. Everybody in England studies it. So it's in the late 1800s. I believe it was the Second Crimean War. And somebody got their signals mixed up, and they told them to march, and they told them to march and attack the enemy, but the enemy was a bunch of Russians, dug in with heavy artillery on either side of a valley and at the end of the valley. So they were on three sides, and you had to go in. And so you were going to get it from both sides and from this side. It would have been a heavy brigade, armored horses, and they would have had cannons. You got to go in there real slowly, and you got to soften them up and get them on the back foot, and then maybe you can charge in there. But even that would be a heavy brigade, not a light brigade. But these guys were so stoic. They were such hard-nosed warriors that they just went for it. The order came, charge, and they let's go, men. Just, they suffered massive casualties. 150 people died, or something like 200 people died, like big casualties. Just an absolute failure. But they went for it because they had their orders, and that's what a soldier does. And so, I don't know how I got onto that.
Principles being more important than your life.
Yeah, principles being more important in your life. So, there's a double argument going on here. Number one is don't be so attached. And sometimes atheists get there also. If you listen to... Sorry, I just thought of some off-color that I'm definitely not going to say. But if you listen to basic training, you're taking a bunch of 18-year-old kids, wet behind the ears, and you're trying to train them to work as a unit, but also to be ready to die in whatever it is. 8 weeks, 12 weeks. And so they have you chant over and over again. I sold my soul to Uncle Sam. Mama, don't you cry no more. Send me back in a body bag. My parents will be crying, but it doesn't matter. Tell my wife and kids I love them. And they're really, it's not religious. They don't even take theism into account. They're just telling you, you're a warrior, you're cannon fodder, you're marching out into battle for glory or death. Don't stress about it too much. Get over yourself. Move. It's heavy, right? So even atheists sometimes try to get this detached argument. Just do your duty, don't question orders, go. Jump. Move. And there's an unstated element there that you're giving your life for your country. You're fighting for a higher cause. You're protecting democracy. You're making the ultimate sacrifice for some bigger thing, bigger than me and bigger than you. This idea called freedom, this idea of government by the people, for the people of the people. And so there's always a higher principle, whether it's theistic or not. And there's a need to teach people that their ultimate ethics shouldn't be whatever helps them to live. There's got to be something more. So, on one hand, Krishna's argument is some good old-fashioned, this is your duty, don't stress it, move. But it's not merely that. There's a philosophical element to it also. And that is that the soul is not the body. It's wholly distinct. People talk about mind, body, and spirit. But that's like saying you, your clothes, and your car. Are your clothes and your car really as valuable as you? People think mind, body, and spirit's really sexy. They think like it represents a really deep, profound understanding of things. But the problem with such a statement is all those things appear to be equally weighted in that statement. They appear to be equally weighted. They weigh the same. Mind, body, spirit. You follow? But you're not your mind, just like you're not your clothes, and you're not your body, just like you're not your car. And so there's you, there's your clothes, and there's your car. Those three things are not equivalent. There's your computer, the hardware. There's the software, or the operating system. And then there's the various apps that you run on that software. Those three things aren't the same. An app without hardware and software doesn't work. Software without hardware doesn't work. Hardware can still exist without the software and without the app, and eventually a new app or a new software can be put on top of it. You follow? And so that hardware, you could argue, all three of those things are actually replaceable. What's not replaceable is the operator of the computer. You, your hardware, your software, and your apps are not equally weighted. Mind, body, spirit. Spirit is you. Mind and body are your possessions. They're not as important as you. So we might have to contend with all three realities, but we should not equally weight them. So Krishna here is creating a hierarchy of duty, of responsibility, of integrity. And that supersedes the principle of live at any cost. And in that way, he's creating like a very similar argument to the modern day military, every military for all time, which has to devalue life to prepare people to walk into battle fearlessly, like the charge of the Light Brigade. But Krishna's not merely doing that. He's also adding a spiritual element to it. That your self is really distinct from your body and your mind. And therefore the soul isn't really capable of killing someone. Is Hitler's soul evil? No. Hitler's not evil. Or maybe Hitler's evil, but the soul that is Hitler is not a Jew-killing, genocidal, megalomaniacal, sociopathic freak. It's his body and his mind. The soul is always distinct. And so our soul becomes enmeshed in this world, covered by this world, but it doesn't become contaminated by this world. On a molecular level, the soul always remains distinct. Just like water may get muddy, but it's not actually, on a molecular level, contaminated, which is why through distillation, it can leave that sediment behind and it can become water, pure water molecules again, and become potable again. Or be desalinated, or go through a sewer processing treatment and then become potable again. Because the water on a molecular level never gets mixed with the dirt. The dirt is external. It's hard sediment. And the water is different. Krishna's adding this element in. And it's powerful. It fuels and gives another layer of depth to the idea of sacrificing your life for a higher purpose. Because it's not even, even if you're an atheist and you're in the military, you got to do that for the nation. But now you're not even going forever. And you can be a little dispassionate while you do it and not really get sunk into this idea of my friends and my enemies. You can be a little more stoic about it and just do your duty. Like Ross has a competition tomorrow, jiu-jitsu competition. And he's freaked out about it. Everybody else is freaked out about it. You ever vomit before your competition? Yeah, it happens. You vomit, you get queasy, and whatever. It's the whole thing. But the reality is that whether he's going to win or lose has largely been predetermined by the training he's done. He's competing against guys about his skill level, who've been in the game about as long as him. And so however much time he put into developing his athleticism, developing his strength, developing his skill, developing his tenacity, his reaction times, then that's what's determined. And when he meets these guys, they're just going to reveal to him how good his training is. This idea that it's a roll of a dice and either person could win It's not really like that. There could be some lucky something or other, but for the most part, when you get into some kind of one-on-one combat, the better person wins. The puncher's chance thing is maybe 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 20. And so for the most part, he's as good as he is, and those guys are as good as they are, and they go out and clash, and the best man wins. It's not like you were better on that day. Generally speaking, it's you're better than me. Let me go back to the drawing board, and I'll try and come back better. That's why usually when they give an instant rematch in a fight, the guy needs some time. If he really gets beat, he needs some time for skill development before he goes back in and just gets an automatic, rubber band rematch. Sometimes in boxing, a lucky punch can end the game. Jiu-jitsu is a little less like that. There could be a flying armbar or something like that, some quick kill technique. But for the most part, our techniques aren't quick kills. They're slow and methodical, cutting through somebody's defenses until they become vulnerable. You're on somebody's back and you choke them. There's a whole bunch of stuff that went into that beyond just taking the guy's back. There's a whole bunch of stuff that was required to completely outflank your opponent and get behind him, where he can do nothing to you offensively and you can do everything to him offensively, because you're in the one place in relationship to his 360 where he has absolutely no tools whatsoever. You took a lot of skill to get there, and you'll be able to do it again. It wasn't just an accident. Sometimes, once in a blue moon, but usually not. So, I don't know why I got into that. Yeah, just detachment. So, this idea of detachment, there's like a lot of ways to get there, but you always need to get there. Because if you're going to go put it on the line, you have to be a little zen. Otherwise you get totally spun out and you're like angry and you hate your opponent. A boxer who fights really hot and angry makes a bunch of mistakes. He's trying to take his opponent's head off. It's real easy. I remember first time I ever boxed, I went to a gym to box, and they put me in with some dude who was smaller than me and weaker than me, who I was sure I could take. And I went after him, and he just beat me senseless. Because he could box, and I couldn't. And he was parrying and slipping and just picking me apart with good footwork and good fundamentals. And I was so blown away at the effortlessness with which he was able to defeat me, because he was just skilled and I wasn't. And I kept trying to swing for the fences and really hit him with a really solid overhand left and pay him back for everything he did to me. But every time I'd load up, he would just pepper me with his jab and beat me to the punch, because I was loading up and telegraphing and dropping my shoulder back to throw this big punch. And that just gave him all the time in the world to beat me. The shortest distance between 2 points, he was able to beat me or use his footwork to evade me. He kind of did everything he wanted to. And so once you see people really swinging for the fences and fighting hot, you know they're going to lose. You got to stay cool. Boxers are the coolest guys in the world. You hit a boxer straight in the face, and he just looks at you. Just gives you nothing. Gives a whole lot of nothing. Bites down his mouthpiece, keeps his chin down, takes a hit, just keeps looking at you, like as if you didn't even hit him. His goal in life is to make you think that there's nothing you can do to him that gets to him even slightly. You know? Get those boxers, those flat noses. There's no cartilage, left. Real flat noses. And you hit them, and it's like they don't even, you're not even breaking their nose anymore. There's no reaction. Their eyes don't water. They just look at you. And you get this feeling like you're fighting a tank or something like that. You're fighting some kind of robot. And it saps your resolve. You want to see the head smash back and somebody's eyes water and then get spent and get crazy, and they open up all sorts of stuff. So Krishna's argument here that you're not the slayer of the slain, it has an added element that it helps you not to see your enemy as your enemy in some kind of fundamental sense. He's not truly evil. And it might seem like it's more of a motivating factor to think your enemy is truly evil, but I would argue that it ends up resulting in you degrading yourself and really going down this dark us and them road, and it's not very valuable in life to be unempathetic towards other people. There's the general who's in charge of Iraq, I can't remember his name. I want to say Smith, but it's a little too trite. I'm not sure if that's his name. But one of his famous statements is, be polite, be friendly, treat everyone with respect, and have a plan to kill everybody you meet. And so I think Krishna's advice here, so now Krishna's advice is just this general, suck it up and get ready for battle. And let's chant some songs about your mother crying when they send your dog tags home to steal you. And then there's a higher principle that you're living for, that's an unstated premise of everything Krishna's saying that's already been touched on in the Gita, which is doing your duty, your dharma, and referred to as such. And so now you've got, in the unavoidable discharge of your duty, sometimes something may happen. There might be some blood or guts, yours or somebody else's, and you just got to stay the course. So there's a higher principle. Then there's a spiritual principle at play, which results in you not seeing people with hate. And ultimately being able to be more zen as you go about your business. And then there's an overall detachment from everything that's not merely just being told at the age of 18 you're going to die, and so suck it up because everybody else is going to die too. But there's a philosophical, you're the soul, you're not the body, therefore don't get so wrapped up in the body. There's some teeth to this argument that Krishna is making, which elevates it beyond the mere chance that you'll get in a boot camp. And it's more toothy, it's got more staying power. You guys following all this? For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. He is not come into being, does not come into being, will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. He's not slain when the body is slain. Now Krishna is getting more philosophical. And as a philosophical addendum or unpacking of the verses he said before. The soul slays not, nor is slain, and now he's getting into it in more detail. How can a person who knows that the soul is indestructible, eternal, unborn, and immutable kill anyone or cause anyone to kill? So he doubled down on this argument, the soul slays not, nor is slain, and that verse, that quarter of a verse became 2 full verses, where he's arguing. If the soul's truly distinct from the body, if the body's destroyed but the soul lives forever, can you really kill the soul? Are you really killing your kinsman? Now that doesn't mean you just go out and wantonly kill somebody, but it does mean in the unavoidable discharge of your duty, if sometimes you have to commit violence, you shouldn't lose sleep over it. And then he gave a little bit more of a philosophical backbone to his initial statement. The soul slays not, nor is slain. Again, jumping back and forth between different voices. Just straightforwardly saying it, giving a little more philosophy behind it. And now he gives an analogy. He gave the analogy of the boyhood, youth, and old age. Here's another analogy. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. That's an interesting argument. Remember how I mentioned the difference between you and your clothes and your car? So Krishna's making that exact same argument. It's from the Gita. That argument is from the Gita. That argument that we hear is from the Gita. So he's giving you analogies to help you conceive of it, almost like an illustration. He's giving you philosophical language. He's also stating points and then expanding upon them, and in general using what good philosophers do. They say their point and they try to prove it. How do you prove it? With evidence, which he just gave. So his first statement, the soul slays not nor is slain. Why not? Because the soul is absolutely indestructible and all you're doing is killing the body. If you understand this about the nature of the soul, that consciousness is a non-material phenomenon, that real things last forever, and there is an aspect of you that lasts forever, then how could you think that you really kill somebody? A better way to think about it is like you put on new garments, take off old ones. It's a much more detached way of thinking about it. And so you see here Krishna really fleshing out an argument, adding to it, making it more compelling. So again, throughout this section of the Gita, Krishna speaks in Upanishadic, cryptic language. Soul slays not nor is slain. That which lasts forever is never destroyed, and that which is ever destroyed doesn't really exist. Just far out cryptic statements. Those things which are real are always real and are never not real. Those things which are ever come into non-existence, they were never real to begin with. The soul slays not nor is slain. So those are cryptic Upanishadic type statements. Then there's more philosophical stuff. Consciousness pervades the body. That's the symptom of the soul. The soul is indestructible, and based on that, you can't really say you kill somebody. And then there's analogies. Boyhood used to old age. So you similarly pass into another body at the time of death. Or, just like you put on new garments. Or, just like you get into a car. And so, Krishna is using a number of different... He says stuff. He says it in cryptic ways. He expands on it philosophically. He gives analogies, and he's trying to, like a good teacher, get through to you. And what's the essential lesson? If you understand you're the soul and not the body, that provides you with a really strong scaffolding, a really strong frame, a really strong skeleton to hang your detachment on, to do your duty, to be peaceful about it, to not see people as friends and enemies, to have a higher understanding of things, to even love your enemy. You guys following this? Now he says indestructible. So what are the typical ways the soul is destroyed? The soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. In fact, let's state it differently. The individual soul is unbreakable, insoluble, can be neither burned nor dried. It's everlasting, present everywhere, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. So he says the soul cannot be withered by wind, therefore it's unwitherable. Cannot be moistened, therefore it's unmoistenable. And he uses both positive and negative language to describe what he's trying to say. Describing things both via positiva and via negativa. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And so when you want to get exact, you do this kind of thing. You say something positive, say something negatively. You follow? Danielle is a girl. She is wearing a jacket. So is a girl, it's one of the three of you. Is wearing a jacket, one of the two of you. And that jacket is not black. And now we know. So sometimes you can state things positively and negatively, and there's value in both. There's value in both. For instance, maybe you could say, well, you could just say it's white, right? But then maybe that's white, maybe it's cream colored. Maybe if you said white, it would freak the person out. They would think it's cream colored. So by saying not black, then we know that's black. There's no dispute that's black. So that makes it easier. You follow? And so sometimes there's value. And if you want to do something completely, you can say things both positively and negatively. And it really helps the person getting a chance that different types of mentalities are receptive to different types of language. And so you use a whole You use some analogies. You use some positive and negative language. You use some philosophical language. You say it just straightforwardly. You argue from a number of angles of vision, and in this way you get through to somebody. Do your duty. Don't be so attached. You're the soul. Don't hate your enemy. Let's think about the nature of the soul, because Krishna's ultimately not just trying to get Arjuna to fight in a battle. He's trying to make himself realized. And so the backdrop of having Arjuna fight is only part of what Krishna's trying to accomplish. He's also trying to illuminate Arjuna's world and help Arjuna see the world in a deeper, more profound way. And so we're getting straight philosophy, which is valuable for somebody whether or not they're fighting in a battle, or irrespective of what that battle may be. Krishna's doing more than just getting Arjuna to sally forth and fight. He's getting him to think and live in a different world so that these doubts will never come upon him again. It is said that the soul is invisible, inconceivable, immutable. Knowing this, you should not grieve for the body. If, however, you think that the soul or symptoms of life will always be born and die forever, you still have no reason to lament. This would be like a variety of atheism. This particular variety of atheism still believes that... so there's two versions of this. You can either go to straight atheism. It's born and it dies forever. So then, and it's just, that's the end. So straight atheism. In which case Krishna will argue, well, if you're going to die anyway, you might as well die doing your duty. There's some value in that. And then, again, there could be an atheistic worldview where you're born, you die, and then you're born again. And so on some level, you're maybe not the soul, but you're the body and you're the karma, and karma exists, and therefore you're born again. And you might not be an eternal being who exists on this philosophical level as immutable and insoluble, but you at least exist beyond one body. And therefore, why sweat it? You're going to have to die anyway and be born again, so it's not that big of a deal. Either one of those positions could be argued, and the latter of them was more common. Most people in India believe in karma. There was some people, the Lokaitas, and the followers of Charvak Muni, the worldly materialistic people, they believed in just a straight materialism. But there were many sort of semi-materialistic sects that believe you existed beyond one body, but perhaps you didn't have a soul. Like Buddhism is anatma, no soul. They believe you're just a confluence of skandhas, but that confluence of skandhas goes on perpetually, life after life, until you disintegrate it. So you have reincarnation, but it's ultimately an atheistic philosophy. It just believes in the paranormal. And so Krishna is dealing with various other arguments that aren't necessarily his argument, but he's going to try to win across the board. Like, for instance, I could say, you can't steal the money that's in that donation box. Why not? Because it has a lock on it. Well, I'll just grab it, get a hammer, break the lock off somewhere else. Now it's bolted down. I'll figure out a way to rip it free from its bolts. Well, then I'll tackle you. Well, I'll run faster than you. Well, I got cameras. You won't run faster than the camera. Cops come and get you. I might have full intentions of tackling the guy, and he gets no chance to do any of those other things. I'm just messing with him and saying different stuff, maybe to cover my real intent, which is to edge closer to him so I can just tackle him for even saying such a thing. But sometimes you make multiple arguments when one will suffice, and you just want to show people that you really know what you're doing, and from no angle of vision do they have validity. And so you want to argue it as well as you can from as many angles of vision as you can. Does that make sense? So, one who's taken his birth is sure to die, and after death one is sure to be born again. Therefore, in the unavoidable discharge of your duty, you should not lament. There's the you're born again. But then the other one, if it's always born and dies forever, then that would be just straight atheism, and this would seem to be an atheism which also includes being born again potentially. All created beings are manifest in their beginning, are unmanifest in their beginning, manifest in their interim state, and unmanifest again when annihilated. So what need is there for lamentation? You start off being nothing, your body again becomes nothing, so what's the big deal? You were initially an ovum and a sperm, and you eventually go back to being dust, so what are we really so stressed about? You guys following this? Some look on the soul as amazing, some describe him as amazing, some hear of him as amazing, while others, after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. Krishna is acknowledging that what he's laying on Arjuna is a little difficult to fathom. That you are actually an eternal being, that your body is your car, that you are not your body, that you never were your body, that you're not even your mind, that you are pure consciousness, not your likes and dislikes, not your thoughts and feelings, but pure consciousness beyond all those things, the witnesser of all those emotional and mental and physical states. That the mere fact that you're able to observe those states proves that you are not those states. That as a result of that, you should be way less attached to your thoughts, to your feelings, to your ideas. You should look for truth, attach yourself to truth. If that involves dying, you should be okay with that. You're going to die soon enough anyway. You should look for a good death. Look for a worthy cause. You shouldn't hate anybody. But if you think everything's over anyway, okay, fine, everything's over anyway, so what are we stressed about? Nothing's going to last anyway. Why are you freaking out? Okay, well, it's not over, we'll be reborn again. Okay, then all the more reason. You're going to be reborn again, so what's the big deal? And from another point of view, we're a bunch of dust, cosmic dust. Now we become what appears to be a human being, and we're going to be cosmic dust again. What's the big deal? With reincarnation, without reincarnation, I'm going to survey all the different philosophies which are around, and I'm going to try to show you that all of them conclude that you should still do your duty and not be attached. And it's difficult. It's difficult to live this. He who dwells in the body can never be slain. Therefore, you need not grieve for any living being, because nobody really dies. If you knew that nobody really died, if you knew that everybody existed forever, eternally, you'd just be so much more detached because you'd realize how small this world was. If you realized you had millions of mothers and millions of fathers, and you've been every species in existence multiple times over, and you would never stop having an opportunity to grow, then you'd be focused on growth. And if living for a few more minutes, a few more seconds from the cosmic point of view in this body involved defiling yourself, you wouldn't do it. Considering your specific duty as a Kshatriya, you should know that there's no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles, and so there's no need for hesitation. There's nothing better for a Kshatriya than to fight for Dharma, is what he says. So what's the problem here? You're a warrior. Warriors have to fight all the time, and you get to fight for Dharma. There's nothing which is more Shreya than fighting for Dharma. So what are you freaked out about? All right, then that segues into another argument. There are a few more verses I was hoping we'd read. We didn't quite get there. But just to wrap this all up with a bit of a bow tie, Krishna is continuing to beat this drum. You're not the body. You're beyond the body. Consciousness is eternal. The body's temporary. It's not you. Therefore, stop talking about, I'm going to kill and they're going to die and it's going to be forever. Get over that. The soul is immutable, unchangeable, eternal, ever existing, insoluble, unburnable. Just like you put on clothes and take off clothes. So do your duty. Don't hate your enemy. Soul slays not nor is slain. We're all ultimately aloof from even the evil stuff we do. It never taints us forever. It just covers us. Therefore, it can be washed off. If you think you're going to die, well then great. Then why are we even having this conversation? You think everybody's going to die? Then great. It's over. So let's do our duty. You think we're going to be born again? Well, great. Then let's die in such a way we're born again in a better situation by not neglecting our duty. And if you think that we're just a clump of cosmic dust that became a human being and now it's going to stop, then great. What's the big deal? We're going to go back to being dust anyway, so do your duty. I know these are difficult ideas. People are amazed by this stuff. It's difficult to fathom, but in fact, you are the soul, you're not the body. And anyway, you're a warrior, and warriors got to fight. Now you get to fight for Dharma at least, and you're going to fight over something, so why not fight for Dharma? And that is all she wrote. Thank you very much, IGTV. End it quick. Good?